Ethan Blake, a wealthy and arrogant man, agreed to a bet that would change his life in ways he never expected. He was used to winning in business, in life, and competition fueled him. But when his close friend Ryan made a bold challenge during a lavish New York party, Ethan was intrigued. Ryan smirked and said, "Let's see if you can win this one." "Ethan, I bet you wouldn't have the guts to marry a woman who doesn't fit your usual type." Ethan, known for dating stunning women, was taken aback. But always eager to prove himself, he raised an eyebrow and asked, "And what's the prize?" With a mischievous grin, Ryan lifted his champagne glass. $1 million to the winner, but you have to marry her, and stay married for at least 6 months. Feeling the thrill of the challenge and the allure of financial reward, Ethan agreed without hesitation. The woman Ryan had in mind was Isla Bennett, someone who didn't fit conventional beauty standards. Ethan didn't know her, but to him, it was just another deal to win. Days later, Ethan received more information about Isla. She was confident, independent, and strong-willed. Nothing like the women he usually dated. That intrigued him even more. He was used to being in control and wondered how he would handle someone who wouldn't bend to his will. Their first meeting took place at a luxurious restaurant. When Isla arrived, Ethan immediately noticed how different she was from anyone he had ever met. She wasn't intimidated by the extravagant setting or by Ethan himself. Instead, she met his gaze with steady confidence. "You must be Ethan Blake, Isla," said directly as she took her seat. "And you must be Isla Bennett," Ethan replied with a composed smile, extending his hand. She hesitated briefly before shaking it with a firm grip, a sign of her determination. "Let's not beat around the bush," Isla began, her tone straightforward. "I know why we're here. Okay, I know about the bet, the terms, and the conditions." Ethan was surprised by her bluntness, but he didn't show it. "And yet, you still agreed to meet?" he asked, curious about her motivation. Isla paused for a moment before answering. "Let's just say I have my reasons. Not naive, Ethan. 6 months may seem short, but a lot can change in that time. If you think you can manipulate or control me, you're mistaken." Ethan smiled. Isla was proving to be more of a challenge than he had anticipated, which only made things more interesting. As their first meeting ended, Ethan found himself increasingly intrigued by Isla. She wasn't like anyone he had met before. She wasn't afraid of him, and that piqued his curiosity, even sparked a sense of admiration. Days passed, and Ethan couldn't stop thinking about how to approach the next step. He was used to being the master of the game, but now it seemed Isla had moves of her own. Their second meeting took place at a simple cafe, a far cry from the glamorous restaurants Ethan usually frequented. Isla had chosen the place, and Ethan, curious, agreed. He wanted to understand who she was and why she had accepted what clearly looked like a temporary marriage contract. When Ethan arrived, Isla was already there, calmly sipping tea. She greeted him warmly, without the coldness of their first encounter, but still carried herself with the same unshakable confidence. "I thought you preferred 5-star restaurants," Isla teased as Ethan sat down. "Sometimes it's good to break the routine," Ethan replied, trying to sound casual, though he felt slightly out of his element. They chatted for a while, exchanging surface-level details. But Ilsa quickly got to the point. "If we're really going through with this," she said, placing her cup of tea on the table, "I want to make a few things clear." Ethan nodded, intrigued. "I'm not interested in your money or your luxury lifestyle. 6 months is 6 months, and I plan on walking away from this exactly the same way I entered." Ethan watched her closely. He knew she was telling the truth. Isla was the kind of woman who knew exactly what she wanted. And clearly, marriage wasn't something she saw as a social ladder, unlike many others might. "So what do you want?" Ethan asked, genuinely curious. "Freedom," she replied, without hesitation. "I want you to know that even though we're entering into this agreement, I won't be controlled by you. I have my own life, and that's not going to change because of a temporary marriage." Ethan smiled. It wasn't the answer he had expected, but he didn't mind granting her that freedom. To him, the marriage was just a formality to win the bet. If she wanted to keep her independence, it wouldn't bother him. "Fine," Ethan agreed. 6 months. After that, we go our separate ways." Isla studied him for a moment, as if trying to determine if he truly accepted the terms. She had accepted this challenge with a plan in mind, and she was determined to ensure everything went according to her wishes. Deep down, she suspected Ethan might try to manipulate the situation, but she also trusted her own strength to resist his influence. The meeting ended on amicable terms, with both of them leaving with their roles clearly defined. Hila would keep her independence, and Ethan would treat the marriage as nothing more than a strategic agreement. But as the days passed and the wedding date approached, Ethan couldn't help but feel that maybe this game wasn't as simple as he had imagined. The wedding took place in a cold, unceremonious manner, more like a carefully orchestrated business transaction than a celebration. Ethan Blake, with his strategic mindset, already saw himself as the winner of the bet. He was certain that 6 months would fly by, and that Hila, no matter how stubborn, would eventually give in to the luxurious lifestyle he was about to offer her. Right after the ceremony, Ethan took Hila to his massive penthouse in the heart of New York, a monument to his wealth. The floor-toozling windows reflected the shimmering city lights, and the interior was filled with the most exclusive and expensive. To Ethan, this was the real battlefield. He would win Hila over with the power of his material world. But from the very first moment, Hila made it clear she wasn't going to back down. As soon as she stepped into the penthouse, she maintained a distant demeanor. The look she gave Ethan wasn't one of admiration. It was defiance. 6 months, Ethan. Not a day more, she said firmly, walking over to one of the large windows. Staring out at the city, unimpressed by the luxury around her, Ethan smiled, confident. He was used to this kind of resistance in the beginning. Every woman in his life had eventually given in to his charm and wealth. Hila would be no different. Or so he thought. In the first few days after the wedding, he tried everything to impress her. Showered her with expensive jewelry, designer clothes, and luxurious trips. All with the expectation that Hila would begin to adapt to the lifestyle he dictated, but to his growing frustration, she refused it all. Hila insisted on sticking to her simple, modest routine, never giving in to the trappings of wealth. "I don't need these things, Ethan," she would say with a calmness that only irritated him more. It deeply bothered him. Ethan, who always got what he wanted, was facing true resistance for the first time. It wasn't about the bet anymore. Now it was personal. He had to win Hila over somehow. He needed to prove that in the end, he was still in control. That's when he began to play more aggressively. He stopped her from going to work, offering reasons like, "You don't need a paycheck anymore," or "Your role is as my wife now." When Hila insisted, he made her wait hours for meetings she thought were important. Ethan manipulated schedules, situations, everything to maintain dominance. But Hila didn't give in. She was a solid rock against Ethan's attempts, and that only intensified his desire to break her. Their relationship became a minefield. Small provocations surfaced in trivial conversations, but Hila, with sharp words, diffused every attempt Ethan made to make her feel inferior or controlled. On one particularly tense night, Ethan tried a more emotional approach. "I don't understand you, Hila," he said, staring at her with a mix of frustration and curiosity. "Any other woman would be happy to live this kind of luxury, but you act like it's not enough. What do you really want?" Hila, who had remained impassive until then, finally lifted her eyes. They gleamed with an intensity Ethan hadn't expected. "What do I want?" she said. "I want respect, Ethan. I'm not a piece on your chessboard. You think you can control me with money, but you're wrong. Money doesn't buy dignity or integrity. You might have all of these things around you, but you're empty inside, and that's what you can't stand." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. For the first time, Ethan felt that he might be losing more than just control. Hila wasn't just resisting Ethan's power. She was dismantling the carefully crafted facade he had built over the years. And that scared him. No one had ever challenged him like this. The fact that Hila could see beyond his wealth made Ethan feel exposed. But instead of backing off, Ethan tightened his grip. He started making plans to isolate Hila, to make her realize that without him, her life would be much harder. He cut off contacts, closed doors that could advance her career, and even sabotaged important events she had been organizing. However, Hila wasn't the kind of woman to be easily intimidated. With every blow, she stood back up, stronger and more determined. She held on to her dignity and refused to be reshaped by Ethan's will. Then one night, Hila played her own card. You think you're in control, don't you? She said, voice calm but calculated. But what you don't know is that I have a plan too. And believe me, when the time is right, you'll see this whole game is built on something much bigger than you ever imagined. Ethan stared at her, surprised. For the first time, he realized he might have underestimated her, and for the first time, he felt real fear. Fear that he might not be the one to win this game after all. The weeks passed like a tightly stretched wire, growing tenser with each day. Ethan, obsessed with control, tried every possible way to manipulate the situation to his advantage. But Isla kept resisting, unflinching, unbroken. She was a fortress he couldn't tear down. Yet there was something Ethan couldn't deny. As time went on, he started to see Isla differently. It wasn't just about respecting her resilience. It was something deeper. She was doing something no other woman had ever done. She was disarming him emotionally, and that made him uneasy. Confused for the first time, Ethan found himself thinking of her not as part of a bet, not as an opponent, but as a person he genuinely wanted to understand. One night, after a particularly heated argument, Ethan stood alone in the large living room, staring out at the city through the towering windows. The glow of the city lights, which once gave him a sense of power, now felt hollow. He wondered why he was feeling this way. Isla was just a woman he married for 6 months, a pawn and a wager. Nothing more. But the truth was, she was stirring something inside him. Something real. He who always controlled his emotions was now being affected. Isla could see right through him. That vulnerability terrified him. As Ethan wrestled with his thoughts, Isla continued with her routine, seemingly more distant each day, almost as if she were waiting for something. Ethan felt like there was an invisible wall between them, something he couldn't break through, and it tormented him. He didn't know if it was pride or the fear of losing control, but something about Isla drew him in a way he never imagined possible. "You're different," said Ryan, the friend who had proposed the bet during a casual dinner. "Normally, you'd have everything under control by now. But it seems like this woman is challenging you in a way no one else ever has." Ethan gave a forced smile, unable to respond right away. He hated to admit it, but Ryan was right. Something was changing. That night, Ethan returned home determined to put an end to his confusion. He needed to settle things, to get Isla out of his head and remind himself that this was just a contract, nothing more. When he walked into the penthouse, he found Isla on the couch, reading a book, completely unaware of his presence. "Can we talk?" Ethan asked, breaking the silence that had become the norm between them. Isla looked up, calmly closed her book, and gazed at him with a serene but attentive expression. "Of course," she replied, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. Ethan sat across from her, trying to find the right words. The tension between them was palpable. He knew he couldn't treat this marriage like a simple formality anymore. Something was changing, and he had to face it head on. "What are we doing here, Isla?" he asked, with a sincerity that even surprised himself. "This started as a game, a bet, but I don't know what to think anymore." Isla stared at him for several seconds before answering. "I'm not playing, Ethan," she said quietly, but with weight. "I never was. From the beginning, I accepted this marriage for reasons that go beyond you. I don't care about the money or your control over things. I'm here for something bigger. And if you haven't realized that by now, maybe it's time you opened your eyes." Ethan felt a tightness in his chest. It was as if she were revealing a secret he still couldn't understand. Frustration consumed him. "I know you have your secrets, Isla, but what irritates me is that the more I try to understand you, the more I realize I'm not in control. And I hate that." He suddenly stood up, unable to stay still, as if the weight of that revelation was too much to bear. Isla remained calm, watching his every move. Then, slowly, she stood and walked toward him, stopping just a few inches away.
Ow.
Ethan felt his heart race. "Ethan," she began, her voice low and soft, "this isn't about control. You've always lived trying to dominate everything and everyone, but with me, you'll have to learn that control isn't always the answer. Sometimes ... things just need to be what they are." Ethan looked into her eyes, and for a moment he felt a connection he had never felt before. It was like for the first time he was truly seeing Isla, not as a piece in a game, but as something real. "So, what do you want?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost a whisper. Isla smiled, a mysterious, quiet smile that gave him chills. I want you to figure that out for yourself, Ethan. And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving him there alone with his thoughts. In the days that followed, the distance between them seemed to grow. Yet in a strange way, Ethan began to feel closer to Isla than ever before. He became obsessed with figuring her out, uncovering the truth behind her motivations. What was she hiding? What was the real reason she agreed to the bet? And at the same time, he felt like he was losing control of himself. He didn't want to admit it, but Isla was changing the way he saw the world, and that terrified him. The 6 months of marriage were almost over, but for Ethan, each day felt like an eternity. He could hardly sleep. The looming revelation he sensed was approaching made his stomach twist. Isla had become an enigma. Not just the woman he married in a bet, but someone who knew something he couldn't quite grasp. The obsession to understand her consumed him. He hired detectives, dug into her past, followed every possible lead, but everything seemed perfectly orchestrated. It was as if Isla had always been 2 steps ahead, controlling the game from the very beginning. One night, after a late business meeting, Ethan returned to the penthouse. The balcony light was on, and there was Isla, sitting alone, looking out over New York like a queen, surveying her kingdom. Ethan stood there, frozen for a moment. He knew this was it. He could feel it. She was ready to tell him what he had been desperate to uncover. But the fear of what he might hear made his throat tighten. He stepped forward, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the quiet space. I need answers, Isla, he said, his voice firm, though his heart raced. I can't take this game anymore. You have to tell me the truth. Isla sighed slowly and rose from her chair. When she turned to face him, her eyes, usually calm and calculating, were now shining with something he couldn't define. There was emotion. There was darkness. There was something fierce. The truth, Ethan, she said with a bitter smile, crossing her arms. Do you really want the truth? He nodded without hesitation, though the tension in the room grew with every passing second. Ethan braced himself for anything, but nothing could have prepared him for what she was about to say. You have no idea who I am, Isla began, her voice sharp and cold. You've always seen people as pawns on your chessboard. But this time, Ethan, you were the pawn. Ethan felt a chill crawl up his spine. I've been playing this game from the start, she continued. He tried to speak, but Isla didn't give him the chance. Do you remember the name Bennett? She asked, her voice rising. Of course you don't. People like you never remember. Ethan took a step back. His mind raced, trying to piece it together. My father owned a small company, she said, her voice trembling. Struggled to keep it alive, till you came along and destroyed it. Ethan's eyes widened, his breath caught. What? What are you talking about? He asked, confused. Isla took a step closer, her eyes blazing with fury and pain. My father, Ethan, he was an honest man, trying to support his family. You took everything, and it led to his death. She paused, her voice breaking before continuing, tears beginning to well up. He took his own life because of you, because of your empire. Your success at any cost. The impact of her words hit Ethan like a blow to the chest. He stood there, frozen, as fragments of long-forgotten deals surfaced in his memory. He had crushed so many companies in his climb to the top. But now one of them had a face, and it was Isla's. Isla. Ethan tried to speak, desperate, but she raised her hand, silencing him. No, she snapped, her voice trembling with restrained rage. You don't get to talk right now. Ethan stood still as she took a deep breath and continued, her tone calmer but heavier. You have no idea what you caused. It's not just about money, Ethan. It's about destroyed lives. You took my father from me, the only person I had in the world. And while you thrived, my mother and I drowned in debt and despair. You lived in luxury while we barely had anything to eat. Ethan was stunned, overwhelmed by the weight of her revelation. His mind scrambled for something. Anything. He could say in response, but he was speechless. I planned everything, Isla went on, her tone now chilling in its clarity. When I found out about your bet, I saw an opportunity. I approached you on purpose. I accepted the deal so that I could make you feel just a fraction of what I felt. I wanted you to know what it's like to be played, to be manipulated, to be powerless. Ethan's body trembled. The man who had always believed he was the one in control now realized he had been the target all along. Isla hadn't been the pawn. She had been the player, guiding every move. Isla, he began, his voice weak. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know any of this. You didn't know because you never cared, she said, stepping closer until her face was inches from his. Her voice softened, but it cut deeper than ever. You destroyed lives without a second thought. And now I'm here. Not to destroy you, Ethan, but to make sure you never forget what you did. She paused. I want you to feel the pain you caused, and that pain will haunt you for the rest of your life. Her words landed like a final verdict. Ethan was faced with something he had never encountered before, real consequences. The guilt was overwhelming, suffocating, and he knew it. He had lost more than just a bet. He had lost something far greater, something he would never be able to win back. Isla turned away and walked to the far end of the room, leaving behind a silence that echoed through the penthouse. Ethan's legs gave out beneath him, and he collapsed onto the couch, unable to move, unable to speak, trapped beneath the crushing weight of what he had done. Isla's revelation thundered through his mind like a relentless storm. Every word she had spoken tore apart the world he thought he knew. The woman he believed was just a pawn in his game of power had just flipped the entire board, and he was left with nothing but the truth. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Blake was truly out of control. Isla didn't wait for a reaction. After dropping the truth about her father's death, she walked away, leaving Ethan alone with his guilt. He stood motionless, the air in the penthouse thick, suffocating as if everything around him was collapsing. He wanted to chase after her, to explain the inexplicable, to apologize. But the truth was, no words came. How could he justify something so cruel, something that had caused so much pain? In the days that followed her revelation, Isla did exactly what Ethan feared most. She ignored him completely. Her presence became a constant reminder of his failure. She walked past him as if he didn't exist, just a shadow in his own home. At breakfast, she sat in silence, barely glancing in his direction. When he tried to speak, the words died in the air, unable to penetrate the wall she had built around herself. Ethan, once the man who commanded every room, who always had control, now found himself invisible, powerless in his own kingdom. The absence of her attention was unbearable. Issa spoke to the staff, managed her personal affairs, but with Ethan, it was as if he were a ghost. The weight of her silence was destroying the very identity he had spent his life crafting. One morning, as she prepared to leave, Ethan finally broke the unbearable quiet. Isla, he called gently, his voice barely holding together. We need to talk. She paused, still facing away from him as she adjusted her coat. The silence in the room grew heavier. Ethan waited, nervous, hopeful for any kind of reaction. Even anger would have been better than this icy indifference. But Isla said nothing. She simply walked out, closing the door behind her with quiet finality. The sound echoed in Ethan's mind long after she was gone. The pain of being ignored by someone he was beginning to see as more than an adversary was something new. He was used to being the one who walked away, the one who had the last word. But now he was the one left standing alone. And that feeling of powerlessness, it grew with every passing hour. But the silence was just the beginning. Isla didn't stop at emotional distance. She began subtly undermining Ethan's confidence at work, in his personal life, in his mind. Important meetings started getting rescheduled without notice. His business decisions were suddenly being questioned. Projects he had initiated began to fail mysteriously. He knew it was her. Even if she never admitted it, Ethan could feel Isla's influence in every unraveling thread of his life. She was pulling the strings just as he once had donned, doing it so skillfully, no one but him could see it. At home, things were worse. Isla moved through the penthouse with an air of absolute disdain. She stopped sitting with him at meals, avoided even basic conversation, and answered his attempts at reconciliation with nothing but cold glances, if his very presence was an annoyance. One night he found her reading again in the living room. The scene looked peaceful, almost normal, but Ethan knew the silence was a trap. He sat on the couch across from her and tried one more time. Illa, he began, his voice low, almost pleading. I know I've done horrible things. I know I've caused you pain, but please, Can we try to work this out? Can we at least talk? Isla slowly closed her book, still not looking at him. When she finally raised her eyes, her face was so cold, so unreadable, that it made Ethan shiver. Talk, she repeated with a bitter laugh. You think there's anything left to say? After everything you've done, words are useless. I was wrong, Isla. I know that, Ethan insisted, standing from the couch, moving closer, desperate for any kind of connection. I would do anything to fix what I've done. I can change. I swear to you. She finally looked at him, truly looked, and the intensity in her gaze nearly knocked the breath from his chest. Change, Isla repeated, rising slowly to her feet. Do you really think that changing now will erase everything? Will it bring my father back? Will it undo the years of misery my mother and I endured because of you? She stepped closer, and Ethan felt like he was shrinking under the weight of her stare. What you do now isn't for me, Ethan. It's for you. You'll carry this weight, this guilt, for the rest of your life. Ethan stood there in silence. For the first time, he realized there would be no quick redemption. No moment of instant forgiveness. He had hoped to fight for something that could be fixed. But Isla had long passed the point of repair. The days that followed, Isla began intensifying the emotional punishment. Ethan was met with cold stares whenever he entered her room. His frustration turned into desperation. He tried in every way to show her he was changing, that he wanted to be better, but every gesture was met with indifference or cutting sarcasm. One evening, after a disastrous business meeting, one he suspected Isla had orchestrated to fail, Ethan returned home and heard her laughing on the phone.
I'll wait.
He caught fragments of her conversation and realized she was discussing his professional failures. It was her. Isla was destroying everything he had built, but she was doing it subtly, methodically, in a way only he could see, and she made sure he suffered in silence. When Isla hung up, Ethan was waiting in the living room. His expression was drained, exhausted, a mixture of pain and buried rage. You're tearing everything apart, aren't you? He asked, his voice low, frustration laced in every word. At work here, you're destroying my life. Isla looked at him with a blank expression, crossing her arms. Destroying your life? She asked, lifting an eyebrow. I'm just giving back what you gave me. She stepped forward, unflinching. Don't worry, Ethan. I won't ruin you financially. That would be too simple. I want you to live with the pain. I want you to feel every little loss, just like I did. I want you to wake up every day and watch everything you built crumble, and know that you caused it. Ethan felt the floor vanish beneath him. It was a nightmare. He'd always been the man who won, who controlled other people's fates. But now, he was the target of a precise, unrelenting revenge. Isla wasn't trying to destroy him quickly. She wanted him to suffer slowly. Day by day, with every loss, every silence, every moment of being forgotten. Weeks passed, and Isla continued her quiet war of silence and subtle destruction. Ethan, once confident and powerful, now wandered through his home like a ghost, a hollow version of the man he used to be. He tried everything to earn her forgiveness, but his efforts always fell short. He was trapped in a cycle of guilt and pain, a cycle Isla controlled with absolute precision. But the worst was still to come. One evening, Isla approached him in the living room. Her eyes were colder than he had ever seen. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply sat down across from him, stared directly into his soul, and said the words that would haunt him forever. You took something from me that I can never get back, she said, her voice steady, sharp as glass. Now I'm returning the favor, and you will live with that for the rest of your life. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but there was nothing to say. She didn't need to explain. The punishment had already begun, and there was no escape from it. He watched as Isla stood and walked away, calm and composed. Like a judge after passing a life sentence, Ethan remained on the couch, hollow and defeated. He was no longer the man who controlled every room. He was the man left behind. And the woman he had underestimated now held the pieces of his shattered world in her hands. The following days were a continuation of his torment. Isla no longer needed to say anything. Her silence screamed louder than any accusation ever could. She walked past him like he was a stranger. At meals, she sat in icy silence. When he tried to speak, she ignored him entirely. Her indifference was a blade that cut deeper every day. One morning, as she put on her coat and prepared to leave, Ethan stood in the hallway watching her, broken, desperate for a reaction. "Isla, please. Just give me something. A word. A look. Anything." She paused for the briefest moment. Not enough to give him hope. Then opened the door and left without a sound. The click of the closing door echoed in his mind long after she was gone. Ethan was unraveling. He who had once mastered every negotiation and bent entire industries to his will was now at the mercy of a woman he had wronged, a woman who had become the architect of his collapse. He was no longer the winner. He was the lesson, and she was the one making him learn it. Isla didn't stop at silence. Her vengeance unfolded in carefully calculated moments, quiet but devastating. At work, Ethan noticed important meetings being canceled without warning. Key partners began pulling out of deals. Projects that once promised high returns started failing mysteriously. It didn't take long for Ethan to connect the dots, though Isla never admitted it. He could feel her influence everywhere, like an invisible hand unraveling his world piece by piece. And the worst part was, no one else noticed. It was a private storm, one only he could see, and she made sure of that. At home, Isla maintained her cold distance. She moved through the penthouse with a quiet authority that left Ethan feeling like a stranger in his own space. She stopped sitting at the dining table when he was there. She avoided shared spaces. And when he followed her, pleading for conversation or some shred of forgiveness, she responded with silence or sharp-cutting glances that shut him down completely. One night, Ethan found her reading in the living room again. The warm lighting and the calm in the space made the scene feel deceptively peaceful, but he knew better. It was just another silent battlefield. He sat down across from her, cautiously. "Isla," he began, his voice strained. "I know I've done unforgivable things. I know I've caused you pain, but please, can we try to work this out? Can we at least talk?" Isla slowly closed her book, not looking at him at first. Then finally she met his gaze. Her eyes were emotionless, her voice cold. "Talk," she repeated with a bitter laugh. "After everything you've done, you think words mean anything?" "I was wrong," Ethan said quickly. "I know that. I'll do anything to make it right. I want to change." She stood up slowly, the expression on her face unreadable. "Change?" she said quietly. "Do you think changing now will erase what you've done? Will it bring my father back? Will it undo the years I spent trying to survive the mess you left behind?" Ethan swallowed hard. "No, I know it won't, but I need to try. Please, Isla." She stepped closer, her presence overpowering. For once, Ethan felt truly small. "What you do now isn't for me," she said. "It's for you. And no matter how hard you try, you'll carry that weight forever." Ethan said nothing. He realized then that this wasn't about being forgiven. This wasn't about fixing the past. It was about living with the wreckage, living with her silence, living with himself. And that, perhaps, was the real punishment Isla had planned all along. In the days that followed, Isla's coldness grew even more precise. Ethan became increasingly desperate, searching for any opportunity to show her that he had changed, that he was sincere. But every attempt was met with the same chilling silence or a sarcastic remark that made it clear she still saw him as the villain in her story. One night, after a humiliating business failure, another project sabotaged from the shadows, Ethan came home to find Isla on the phone laughing. Her tone was light, even joyful. He stayed hidden behind the hallway wall and listened. She was talking about him, about his business, about his downfall. He couldn't hear every word, but the meaning was clear. She was behind it. And she didn't care if he knew. When Isla ended the call and walked back into the room, Ethan was already sitting in the living room waiting. His body was tense, his jaw tight, his heart heavy with a cocktail of sorrow and frustration. "You're tearing everything apart, aren't you?" he asked, voice low. "At work here? Everywhere. You're destroying my life." Isla stood still for a moment, watching him with a blank expression before slowly crossing her arms. "Destroying your life?" she echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Just giving back what you gave me." Her words were simple, but they cut deeply. "Don't worry, Ethan. I won't ruin you financially. That'd be too easy, too quick. I want you to feel it. Every little loss, every disappointment, every mistake. I want you to wake up each morning and wonder what will fall apart next. Just like I did." Ethan felt the floor shifting beneath him. This was no longer about vengeance for her. This was about justice, her version of it. Slow, relentless, personal. He had once controlled people like chess pieces. Now, he was the one being cornered, every escape blocked by someone who had mastered the game far better than he had ever expected. Weeks passed, and Isla didn't stop. She ignored him at every turn, made sure her absence was louder than any argument ever could be. Ethan, the man who once had people hanging on his every word, was now invisible in his own home. He tried to fix things, tried to win her back, but his words meant nothing. His gestures meant less. He was met with disdain, sarcasm, or worse, silence. He was losing everything. Not just money, not just pride. He was losing himself. One night, Isla finally confronted Ethan again, but this time with a calmness that was far more terrifying than any rage. She found him sitting on the couch, exhausted, broken, hollow. She stood before him with her arms crossed, her face unreadable. "Ethan," she began, her voice soft but sharp, "you took something from me that I can never get back." He looked up at her, barely able to hold her gaze. "Now I'm returning the favor," she continued, "and you'll live with that for the rest of your life." She didn't yell, she didn't cry, she simply walked away and left him in the silence. She didn't need to say anything else. The punishment had already begun long ago, acute, and now it was simply unfolding, piece by piece. From that night on, Ethan was a shadow. The man who once stood tall in boardrooms and owned every space he walked into was now bent beneath the weight of his own guilt. He barely spoke. He barely ate. He wandered through the penthouse as if it were a prison, and Isla the ghost who haunted it. He tried to reach her, again and again, but she ignored him completely. She no longer even acknowledged his presence. During meals, she didn't speak. When he passed her in the hall, she didn't look at him. When he whispered apologies in the quiet of the night, she never responded. Ethan Blake, once invincible, had become a man undone. And Isla didn't even need to touch him. Her silence was a blade sharper than any weapon. Her distance was a punishment more brutal than anything he could have imagined. He tried to call out to her one morning as she gathered her things near the door. "We need to talk," he said, barely above a whisper. She didn't stop. Oh, she didn't turn. She adjusted her coat, picked up her bag, and walked out. The sound of the door closing behind her echoed in Ethan's mind like a final judgment. It wasn't anger that was destroying him. It was this: being erased. He wasn't just being punished. He was being forgotten. Ethan was drowning in isolation. The silence, the absence of recognition, the daily reminders that Isla no longer saw him. All of it was consuming him from the inside out. Every morning he woke with the same ache in his chest. Every night he fell asleep wondering if she would ever look at him the way she once had, even with contempt. But Isla's punishment wasn't just emotional. It was surgical, deliberate. She began undermining him in subtle but devastating ways. At work, colleagues he had once relied on became distant. Contracts were delayed. Clients pulled out without explanation. Soon realized Isla was still pulling strings, and she was doing it so expertly that no one suspected a thing. She was dismantling him, quietly, efficiently. At home, her disdain remained absolute. She refused to share space with him for more than a few seconds. If he was in a room, she would leave. If he spoke, she would ignore it. And yet her presence haunted every corner of his mind. One evening after another brutal day, a meeting lost, a deal ruined. Ethan came home to find Isla on the phone. She was laughing, effortlessly, like nothing had happened. He stopped just outside the room, listening. She was talking about him again. His decisions, his failures. He heard her say something about watching it all fall apart. She didn't even lower her voice. When she finally hung up, Ethan stepped into the room. She didn't flinch when she saw him, didn't apologize, didn't explain. He just stared at her, eyes hollow. "You're tearing everything down," he said quietly. "At work, at home. You're destroying my life." Isla met his eyes. Calm, steady, cold. "No," she said, her voice clear. "I'm just giving back what you gave." She stepped closer. "Don't worry, Ethan. I won't ruin you the way you ruined my father. That would be too quick. It's too easy." She leaned in slightly, her eyes never breaking from his. "I want you to feel it all, piece by piece, like I did." And she walked away, leaving him standing in the ruins. The empire he had built with ruthless ambition was collapsing, and the woman he thought he could manipulate had become the architect of his unraveling. Weeks passed, and Isla continued her quiet dismantling of Ethan's world. She ignored him completely, walking through the house as if he didn't exist. Every time he tried to speak to her, she shut him down with silence, or a single glance that froze him in place. The man who once commanded every space he entered now wandered aimlessly through his own home, a stranger in a place he thought he controlled. Ethan tried everything: apologies, gifts, even attempts to show vulnerability. But nothing softened her gaze. Nothing cracked the cold wall she had built around herself. He was being punished with precision, and Isla never once lost her calm. She wanted him to live in it, the same way she had lived in the wreckage he caused. One night, Ethan found her in the living room again. The scene was almost identical to so many others. Isla, seated quietly, reading, her face serene. But the peace in that room wasn't for him, it was for her. He sat across from her, heart racing, voice almost trembling. "Isla," he said quietly, "I know I've done things I can't undo. I know I hurt you, but please, can we talk?" She didn't respond at first. Then slowly she closed her book and looked up at him. "Talk," she said, her tone sharp with disbelief. "Do you think there's anything left to talk about?" "I was wrong," he said, standing, taking a step closer. "I know that, but I'm trying to change. I swear to you, I would do anything to fix what I've done." She looked at him for a long moment, then stood slowly, not backing away, but stepping toward him with the same fearlessness she had always shown. "Do you really think that changing now erases everything?" she asked. "Do you think it brings my father back? Do you think it makes the nights my mother and I spent crying in a tiny apartment go away? That it fixes the years of emptiness, the pain, the silence?" "No," Ethan whispered, his throat tight. "I know it won't, but I have to try." Isla stared at him, unblinking. "What you do now, Ethan, it's not for me. It never was. I'm not asking for change. I'm not asking for forgiveness." She stepped so close that he could barely breathe. "You'll carry this," she said. "You'll live with this." And with those words, she left him standing in the center of the room. Not broken, but stripped bare. His guilt, his shame, his desperation, all laid out with no shield to protect him. There would be no simple redemption, no quick fix. Just a long road of consequences. In the days that followed, Ethan grew more desperate. The silence, the rejection, the invisible punishments, it was all closing in on him. He had lost control over everything: his company, his home, his identity. And worst of all, he had lost Isla. But even then, he didn't give up. He began to change his approach. Stopped trying to convince her with words. Instead, he turned inward. He reflected. He watched. He listened. Began noticing the little things. How Isla always started her mornings with strong black coffee, no sugar. How she kept a small collection of peony flowers in an old vase by the window, even when they were starting to wilt. How she paused for a moment before she read, like she was grounding herself. These details, once insignificant to him, now felt monumental. He didn't follow her. He didn't try to manipulate the moments. He simply observed and remembered. That same afternoon, Ethan went to one of the best flower shops in Manhattan and purchased a bouquet of fresh peonies. But he didn't hand them to her. He just left them on the kitchen table. No note, no explanation, just the flowers. When Isla returned from her walk and found them, she said nothing. She didn't ask who they were from. She didn't need to. Ethan watched her discreetly from the other room. She stood in front of the bouquet for a few long seconds, then reached forward and gently touched a petal. She picked up one flower, smelled it, then carefully placed it back. She didn't smile, but she didn't throw them away either. That, for Ethan, was something. In the days that followed, he kept up with small gestures. He made her coffee in the morning just the way she liked it, then quietly left the kitchen before she came in. He prepared breakfast and stepped away before she sat down. He never imposed, never asked for conversation. He simply let her see that he was trying, without demanding anything in return. Though Isla didn't drop her guard, she didn't reject the gestures. She drank the coffee. She ate the breakfast. She kept the flowers. And Ethan waited. Every day he woke with the same goal: to show her through actions, not words, that he had changed. He saw her now. It's not as a challenge. Not as a bet, but as a person. Someone he deeply respected. Someone he maybe even loved. It was on a particularly cold evening that something shifted. Isla stood out on the balcony, wrapped in a thick blanket, her eyes fixed on the glowing skyline. The city lights twinkled beneath a quiet, cloudy sky. She looked peaceful, but distant, as if she were somewhere far away. Ethan hesitated, watching her from the doorway. Then, carefully, he poured a cup of hot tea, the way she liked it, and walked out to her with measured steps. He stood beside her without saying a word and gently offered the cup. "Here," he said softly. "I thought you might want something warm." She didn't look at him at first, but after a moment she reached out, took the cup, and nodded slightly. An acknowledgement, silent but real. They stood together, side by side, facing the city. The wind was sharp, but the moment felt still. The silence between them was no longer unbearable. It was shared. After a few long minutes, Isla finally spoke. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. Ethan breathed in deeply, then exhaled slowly, watching his breath curl into the air. "Because I realize that talking doesn't matter anymore," he said. "Not for you, not for me. My words, they don't carry weight. Not after everything I did." He paused. "I just want to show you that I've changed. Not to win anything, not to fix what can't be fixed. Just because I want to be better. Not for the bet, not for pride. For me, for you." Isla didn't say anything at first. She simply held the cup of tea between her hands, letting the warmth settle in. "You can't change the past, Ethan," she finally said, her tone softer than he expected. "I know," he replied, "but maybe I can change what comes next." She looked at him for the first time that night. Really looked. There was still hardness in her eyes, but something else too. Curiosity. A flicker of something unspoken. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a beginning. And for Ethan Blake, that tiny flicker of hope was everything. The days following that quiet evening were filled with tension, but also with a cautious kind of hope. Ethan continued his small, consistent gestures. He no longer pushed, no longer expected anything in return. He was present, but respectful, kind, but reserved. And slowly, Isla responded. Not with warmth, not yet, but with less resistance. She began accepting the coffee without hesitation. She no longer left the room the moment he entered it. Sometimes during breakfast she even allowed short conversations. Light, superficial exchanges, but conversations nonetheless. The walls between them were still there. But now, Ethan could sense that they were no longer made of stone, just thick glass. And little by little, they were starting to crack. Then came the moment he hadn't expected. One evening, as he adjusted his tie and prepared to leave for a business meeting, Isla walked into the room. She paused near the door, her expression unreadable. "Can you cancel your meeting?" she asked. Ethan froze, startled. It was the first time in weeks she had shown any interest in his comings and goings. He hesitated for only a second before pulling out his phone and canceling the meeting without another word. He didn't ask why. He didn't push. He just stayed. They sat together on the couch, a careful distance between them. No words at first, just the hum of the city below and the occasional sound of a taxi horn far off in the streets. But this time, the silence wasn't cold. It was thoughtful. Eventually, Isla spoke. "I'm not ready to forgive you," she said, looking ahead. Ethan nodded slowly. "No." "But," she added, almost reluctantly, "you're showing me something I didn't expect. You're trying. And maybe that means something." Ethan's heart raced. He didn't smile. He didn't react. He just looked at her with quiet understanding. "I'll keep trying," he said simply. She nodded, and they sat in that moment, the space between them a little warmer than it had been in months. For Ethan, it wasn't victory, but it was something far more meaningful. It was a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. The weeks that followed that evening were filled with cautious steps forward. Isla was still guarded, but not unreachable. She allowed Ethan to sit with her during meals. Sometimes they shared a few words, sometimes just a glance. But what mattered most was that the coldness was beginning to fade. The silence, once used as punishment, had turned into something different. Now it was filled with possibility. Ethan didn't press for more, didn't ask for answers she wasn't ready to give. He simply remained, consistent, quiet, present, and Isla, in turn, no longer treated him like a stranger. Still, he could feel it. She was holding something back, something big. He didn't know what it was, but he could sense it in the way she paused sometimes when looking at him. The way her voice trembled just slightly when speaking about the past. There was something she hadn't told him yet, something that still lingered between them like a shadow. One night, as rain softly tapped against the windows of the penthouse, Ethan found her curled up on the couch, lost in thought. He sat down across from her, watching her for a long moment, before finally breaking the silence. "Isla," he said gently, "I know there's still something you haven't told me. I don't know what it is, but I can feel it, and I need to know." She didn't answer right away. Her hands were folded in her lap, her eyes cast downward. The silence stretched on, but Ethan didn't interrupt. He waited. Finally, she spoke. "You're right," she said softly. "There is something." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with pain, but also with a quiet strength. "I didn't think I could tell you. Not after everything, but maybe it's time." Ethan leaned forward slightly, heart pounding. He knew. Whatever it was, this moment would change everything. Isla took a deep breath, then began. "Do you remember the company you destroyed?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ethan nodded slowly. "The one your father managed." She looked away, tears welling in her eyes. "Yes, but that's not all you destroyed." Ethan's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I was pregnant, Ethan," she said, her voice no louder than a whisper. Those words hit him like a tidal wave. Pregnant. He blinked, stunned, his mind unable to fully absorb it. "I was pregnant at the time," Isla continued, her voice barely holding steady. "And when we lost everything, when my father died, when the stress and grief became too much, I lost the baby." Ethan felt like the floor had dropped out from beneath him. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't speak. The weight of what she had just said crashed down on him like a collapsing building. He had destroyed not only a family, not only a life's work, but a life that hadn't even begun. Ethan could barely form words. I didn't know," he whispered, the guilt in his voice deeper than anything he'd ever felt. Isla looked at him, tears streaming down her face, but her expression composed, strong. Even in pain, she held her dignity. "No," she said firmly. "You didn't know, because you never cared to know." Her words sliced through him. "You didn't look at the people you were hurting, Ethan. You didn't see the families, the lives, the dreams. You just saw numbers. You saw profit, saw power." She paused, her voice breaking only slightly. "I lost my child, and you went on with your life like nothing happened." Ethan collapsed onto the arm of the couch, his hands gripping the sides of his head. He had thought he was ready for any truth, but nothing could have prepared him for this. "I don't have the words," he said at last, his voice hoarse. "What I did is unforgivable. I'll never forgive myself. But I would do anything to make it right." She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes shimmered with emotion as she studied him. Finally, she took a deep breath and said, "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Ethan. What happened? What you caused? It changed me. It changed everything." He nodded slowly, absorbing her words with the weight they deserved. "But," she continued, after a pause, "I can see that you're trying. And maybe, just maybe, one day I'll be able to look at you without remembering what I lost." Ethan's heart clenched, but there was a flicker of hope in her voice. And that flicker was more than he thought he deserved. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said with quiet determination, "no matter how long it takes. I'll prove to you that I've changed, so that I can be someone you trust, someone you can forgive." Isla looked at him, long and hard. And for the first time since the beginning of their strange, tangled story, she didn't look at him with hate. It wasn't love. It wasn't peace. But it was something. A door not quite open, but no longer shut. "We'll see," she said softly. "We'll see if you can." And she stood, walking to the balcony. Ethan remained behind, silent, but changed, not redeemed. Not yet, but no longer the same man who had made that bet. No, he was something else. A man who had finally started to understand what it meant to truly live with consequences, what it might take to earn grace. The days after Isla's revelation were transformative for Ethan. Her words haunted him. Not just the confession of the child he never knew, but the reminder of everything he had ignored. Every life he had ruined. Every careless decision that left others shattered. But instead of sinking into shame and guilt, Ethan made a decision. He wasn't going to let the past define the rest of his life. He couldn't undo the pain, but he could stop running from it. He could face it. He could change. That morning, Ethan made a vow, not to Isla, but to himself. He wouldn't just apologize anymore. He would take action. The first thing he did was begin tracking down the families and individuals whose lives he had damaged during his rise to power. It was uncomfortable, painful, humbling, but it was necessary. He showed up unannounced to places he had done, thought about in years, small businesses he debought out or crushed. One of the first was the family of an old competitor, a man whose company Ethan had absorbed and dissolved for a minor gain. The house was modest. The man who opened the door stared at Ethan in disbelief. "I'm Ethan Blake," he said, his voice steady but full of humility. "I'm here to apologize." The man blinked, stunned, and then let out a bitter laugh. "Apologize," he scoffed. "What's that going to fix?" "Nothing," Ethan replied honestly. "But I'm not here to fix the past. I'm here to help build something new, if you'll let me." Over the next few weeks, Ethan continued. He knocked on doors. He wrote checks. He listened to the stories of those he had hurt, sometimes for hours. He offered not just compensation, but his presence, his time, and his complete sincerity. He wasn't trying to win anyone over. He was trying to make things right, or at least less wrong. He set up a recovery fund for struggling entrepreneurs, focused on helping rebuild the dreams he had once destroyed. And all of it, quietly. No cameras, no press, no recognition. He didn't want credit. He wanted to be better. And Isla, from a distance, saw it all. At first, she remained cautious, detached. She didn't say anything. She just watched. But with each passing day, she noticed something change in Ethan. He was no longer seeking validation. He was living differently. Not for the bet, not for her forgiveness, but because something inside him had truly shifted, and that, more than any gift or apology, made her begin to believe. Maybe, just maybe, he meant it. One evening, Isla stood alone on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The breeze was gentle, but her thoughts were heavy. So much had changed, not just around her, but inside her. She had seen Ethan visiting the families. She had seen him humbled, quiet, consistent. No grand speeches, no manipulation, just action, quiet redemption. When he returned that night, his steps were slower, but more grounded. His expression had shifted from desperation to clarity. He no longer carried the need to prove, only the need to live differently. He joined her on the balcony without speaking. They stood there in silence for a while, shoulder to shoulder, not touching, but not apart. "How was it today?" Isla asked, her voice softer than it had been in months. Ethan let out a long, weary sigh. "Tough," he admitted, "but necessary. Every conversation, every apology, it's a reminder of who I used to be, and who I never want to be again." Isla looked out over the city. She didn't respond right away. But when she finally turned to face him, her eyes no longer held the ice that had once defined every glance. There was something else there now, a softened edge, a possibility. "You're different," she said simply. And it wasn't a question. Ethan nodded, his eyes steady. "I want to be deep." Isla looked at him for a long moment, and then, for the first time since the beginning, she gave him something more than silence. She gave him a sliver of trust. "I can see that," she said, "and I want you to know. I'm ready to try." His breath caught in his chest. "Maybe," she continued, "it's time to leave the past behind. Maybe it's time we try to build something new." Ethan's throat tightened. He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Those words from her meant more than he had ever hoped to hear. Not a promise of love, not yet, but a new foundation, a real one. It's not built on a bet or a lie, but on growth, pain, and truth. For the first time in a long while, they stood not as enemies, not as strangers, but as two people who had survived the wreckage, and still stood facing each other.
Together?
As the 6-month marriage agreement neared its end, something unexpected happened. Isla and Ethan began to grow closer, not through obligation, but through understanding. Their conversations became more natural. Their silences became more comfortable, and their shared moments, once cold and calculated, now carried warmth. Laughter began to return. Cautious, hesitant, but real. They started enjoying simple things together. A walk through the park, reading side by side, making dinner without tension. It was as if something was being rebuilt from the ashes of the bet, something fragile yet hopeful. They were no longer just two people trapped in a contract. They were something else now, something real. And then came the night. The last night of their 6-month arrangement. Ethan prepared a quiet dinner. No extravagance, no luxury, just a simple table, a home-cooked meal, and candles flickering in soft light. He wore no suit. He didn't try to impress. He just wanted to be present. As Isla sat across from him, he could see it in her eyes. The openness, the uncertainty, the flicker of affection she wasn't quite ready to admit. Halfway through the meal, he set his fork down and looked at her, heart pounding. "I know our agreement ends tomorrow," he said, his voice honest, trembling just slightly. "But I don't want this to end." Isla looked up, still. "I don't want us to end," Ethan continued. "I never thought I'd say this. But I've fallen in love with you, Isla, and not because I have to, not because of the challenge, because of who you are. Because of everything you've shown me, because of how you've changed me." There was silence. Then Isla set her glass down gently and met his gaze. "I never expected this," she said softly. "Not after everything, not after what you did." He nodded, accepting. "But I've seen you," she continued. "I've seen you take responsibility. I've seen you rebuild what you once destroyed. And I think I've fallen for you too." Ethan blinked, stunned. "I'm not promising this will be easy," she said. "But if you still want to try, I'm willing." He reached across the table, gently taking her hand. "No games," he said. "No conditions. No more control. Just us." Isla smiled. Small but true. Just us. Months passed, and Ethan and Isla were no longer the people they had been when the bet began. The foundation of manipulation, resentment, and cold strategy had crumbled, replaced by something fragile but authentic. Trust. Then one morning, Isla felt something unfamiliar. Nausea. It came and went, day after day. She brushed it off at first, but eventually, curiosity gave way to suspicion, and suspicion to certainty. She was pregnant. When the doctor confirmed it, Isla sat in stunned silence for a long time. Child. A life. A new beginning she hadn't planned, but didn't fear. Later that evening, she found Ethan in the kitchen, finishing up dinner. The smell of roasted garlic and herbs filled the space. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice soft but firm. He immediately grew serious. She stepped closer. "I'm pregnant." Ethan froze. His hands dropped to his sides, his expression unreadable for a heartbeat, then shifted, laughed. But it wasn't nervous or confused. It was joy. Overwhelming, unfiltered joy. And then came the tears. He rushed to her, held her gently but tightly, and cried into her shoulder. "I swear to you," he whispered, "I'll do everything right this time. Everything." She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her hand settled on his back, and she nodded against him. They stood there, wrapped in a moment that felt like healing. The pain of the past hadn't vanished, but it had brought them here. To this, to a child, to a future. Days later, Ethan prepared something special. A ring. A quiet dinner. A question. Not as part of a wager. Not born of pride or pressure. This time it was real. "I want to marry you again," he said, holding out the ring. "Not because of a bet, not because of anything I once was, because of who I've become. And because I want to spend the rest of my life with you and our child." Tears filled Isla's eyes as she smiled and whispered, "Yes." This time the wedding was small, only close friends and no press. No luxury for luxury's sake, no performance. Just love. Genuine, raw, imperfect, real. They said their vows beneath the open sky. And as they danced later that night, Isla rested her head against Ethan's chest and whispered with a quiet smile, "Who would have thought?" It all started with a bet. He kissed her hair and murmured, "Best gamble I ever made." The story of Ethan and Isla didn't end with a wedding. It began there. Their new life wasn't perfect. It never would be. They carried scars, and sometimes those wounds ached. But they had something now that they didn't before. Truth, accountability, and love born from fire. Ethan continued his work, not just professionally, but personally. He still met with families he had wronged. He still paid reparations, volunteered, offered his support quietly. He wasn't doing it for validation. He was doing it because he had changed. Because he needed to stay changed. And Isla, though still cautious at times, softened. Her heart, once guarded by walls made of iron, began to beat without fear again. She found joy in small things. The feel of Ethan's hand over her growing belly. The sound of laughter in the apartment. The scent of coffee shared in quiet mornings. They built routines together. Real ones. They talked about names for the baby. Ethan secretly studied parenting books, wanting to get it right. Isla painted one of the rooms herself, refusing to let anyone else prepare the nursery. They were building something from the ruins. And they both knew. This wasn't just a second chance at love. It was a second chance at life. As the seasons changed, so did they. And when their baby was finally born, the world seemed to hold its breath for a moment of grace. It was a girl. Ethan held her in his arms, overwhelmed, his tears falling freely. Isla watched him, eyes full of emotion. "You're crying again?" she teased gently. "I never imagined," he whispered, "that I could ever deserve this." She leaned in and kissed his cheek. "Then make sure you never stop earning it." He nodded, and he would. Because the man Isla had once set out to break, it's been broken. But from that brokenness, something new had been forged. And now, with a child in his arms and the woman he loved by his side, Ethan Blake finally understood what it meant to live with purpose, with humility, and with love. And it all started with a bet that it ended with redemption. In the beginning of a legacy worth building. What did you think of Isla and Ethan's journey? Would you have made the same choices? Tell us in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Hit the notification bell so you never miss another powerful story of redemption and transformation. And remember, sometimes the deepest love begins in the most unexpected places. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.